Before we get started with today's video, I have a major announcement to make. I have recently partnered with several other narrators on the platform to help build up a groundbreaking app called Chilling, a brand new home for scary stories. Chilling is a revolutionary mobile app that allows you to customize your listening experience in ways that YouTube never could. Bottom line, if you can't get enough content from me here on this channel, myself and other narrators here on YouTube are going to be providing hours of unique and spine-tingling scary stories exclusively over on Chilling. Before you go download and start your free trial, let me share with you a little of what all Chilling has to offer. We have hundreds of amazing stories, terrifying true stories, and different categories of horrifying fiction. There is something for everyone. And even though Chilling has plenty of pre-generated playlists, you also have the ability to mark stories as favorites and mix and match individual stories to create your own customized playlists. Try doing that on YouTube. One of the most exciting things about Chilling is our one-of-a-kind ambient sound menu. You can select and change the background noise of the story. This change happens seamlessly without impacting the story you're currently playing, so you can start a story off sitting by the crackling of a campfire, but by the end, find yourself stuck in a thunderstorm. Now let's talk about the best part about Chilling. It's completely ad-free. That's right, no ads. You can listen to hours of stories with zero interruptions. And as much as you might love listening to my YouTube channel, I wanted to give you more options. And this is just the beginning. We'll be adding content multiple times a week and expanding the variety of content to include classic novels and audio series. Beyond narration, we're already hard at work to add the ability to stream video content in the form of Chilling original movies and shows. And it doesn't stop here, because at the end of the day, we built Chilling for you, and we can't do this without you. We need your honest feedback. Tell us what you'd like to see in the future. We'll be sending our subscribers surveys so you can share your thoughts with us, and we'll honestly take a look at every one of them. These first few months are so important for us to fine-tune the platform to become something special, and I hope you will follow us on this journey. So what are you waiting for? Download now and start your free trial today. Go to your app store and search for Chilling, or simply click the link in the description below. I was a 911 dispatcher for just over 20 years. Over the course of my career, there were many calls that seared themselves into my memory, and most of them are far too messed up for a safe-for-work thread like this. But here's a few short ones that spring to mind whenever anyone asks me what my most intense call was. The first that comes to mind was a woman who had just gone into labor. The thing that really shocked me at first was that she had said that she was just 24 years old, but this was her 6th time going into labor. I figured that meant that she had at least a husband or some kind of baby daddy around, but I was absolutely horrified to hear that she was totally alone. Not a single other person was around to support or care for her. I dispatched a team of EMTs as soon as I could. Then I stay on the line to give her a few basic instructions, grabbing towels, bottles of water, making sure she's breathing okay, and stuff like that. I wasn't a mother at that point in my life, so I didn't really have any frame of reference for how long it might take. Some births are over in a matter of hours, some stretch into days worth of pain and pushing. Point being, after less than half an hour on the call, when she says, "It's out. I pushed out the placenta too, thank you," I'm kind of taken aback. I asked her if she's okay, and she replies, "Sure, just putting some pants on. Excuse me a moment." And however confused you are to read this, just know that I was 100 times more confused at the time. I ask her what the baby is, and if it's crying, and she's like, "I don't know." I ask her again to check on the baby before the EMTs arrive, but again, she basically just refuses. At that point, it hits me that it's probably just a prank call. Like, she sure did sound like she was in labor when I answered the call, but if she was a talented enough actress, I can see myself falling for a put-on. Either way, I was angry, real angry, and I started making a note of the caller's number and address so I can pass it on to my supervisor as a malicious call, the kind we can prosecute over. But right as I'm doing that, I hear the EMTs arrive in the background of the call, and from the way they reacted and what they were saying before she hung up the call, I knew it wasn't a prank at all. I was this mix of horrified and furious. I wanted to reach through the phone line and punch her in her stupid face, but at the same time, I didn't want to be within 100 yards of whatever horror show apartment she was occupying. I didn't get a chance to find out what happened to her. Presumably she was transported to the hospital with her baby, but whether or not the poor thing survived, God only knows. The second call also happens to be from a woman in labor. I asked her where she was calling from, and she told me she was driving herself to the hospital whilst having contractions. In theory, if they weren't bad contractions, I guess you could drive yourself, but it's definitely not something we advise women to do. That may be different for others. Our dispatch center didn't, and this was a classic example of it. She seemed to be in a lot of pain, and in her panic, she'd gotten herself totally lost after pulling over on the on-ramp to the interstate. I kept asking for landmarks and trying to give her directions, but the only solid piece of info I could get out of her was the description of her car. While trying to pinpoint her location, medics were searching all of the ramps to the interstate. She told me the baby was coming, and within just a few minutes of pushing, she had delivered. But then, I asked her if the baby was crying, and she says no. I feel a hint of my own panic at this point, and I asked her where her baby is. She tells me it's in the footwell of her car. I asked her to pick it up, and just like the first mom, she refuses. I don't know if she was exhausted or what, but that was another distressing one. And again, I was unable to get any news on the outcome, and I was only left just to wonder. The third super rough call that comes to mind is the naked woman on the highway. I got a call from a guy who'd spotted a young woman acting bizarrely at the side of a highway. I asked him if he knows her or why she might be acting that way, and he says no, but that he thinks that she's drunk or something. But then I ask for a description of the girl, and the guy tells me how this young woman is completely naked, hair a mess, and she's covered in dirt. He told me he tried to see if she was okay, and she tried to bite him. I tell the caller to keep their distance from the woman, but to try to keep me up to date on her location, and he was evidently quite close because I hear a car honking its horn before he starts yelling, "She just ran across the highway. She almost got hit by a car." This continues on for a few minutes, with the caller telling me how the girl's running back and forth with cars honking and flashing their lights at her, until finally, oh my God, he hit her." All the vehicles that came after had no idea what was going on, and no marked unit would get on the scene for another 10 minutes. Cars keep running her over again and again and again, just obliterating what was left of her until, by the time the lanes were closed off, her body parts were just spread along a 2-mile stretch of the interstate. I was working the fire/EMS radio that night when one of the units radioed into me. While he was talking, I heard another medic in the background debating with another if what they were looking at was this girl's head. That one really got to me. But the last one got me even worse. I got a call from a man saying that there was a fire in the hotel he was staying in. He told me he was trapped inside his hotel room because there was too much smoke in the hallway outside, and that he was with his wife and children. I felt sick when I heard him say that, but we're trained to be as cold as possible. I asked him if it was possible to escape from a window, but he told me that they were on the 7th floor, and there was no way his kids could be able to climb down. Right when he tells me there's more and more black smoke coming into the hotel room, I ask him to take shelter in the ensuite bathroom and stuff wet rags in the door's cracks if there are any. I also told them to use flannels like makeshift gas masks, wetting them and putting them loosely over their mouths and noses to filter out some of the smoke. As I'm basically yelling at EMS to get their butts over there, I could hear coughing and crying in the background of the call. The mom was spraying the door with cold water from the shower, but it didn't seem to help at all. and there was a moment when I distinctly heard one of their kids ask, "Mommy, are we going to die?" I kept talking to the dad as long as I could, keeping him up to date with the progress of fire and EMS, but it wasn't long before his voice became weak, and then he stopped talking altogether. That one I did get an update on. The whole family was found dead in the bathroom, kids tucked into the tub, parents trying desperately to protect them from the smoke and flame. I had nightmares about that one for a long, long time. Working 911 dispatch was without a doubt the most emotionally eviscerating experience of my entire life, and sometimes I wonder how I managed just over 2 decades of it. I loved it and hated it in equal measures. Every year I lied to myself. One more year, that's all, I'd think. But when it went on and on and on, and in the busier jurisdictions, there wasn't a day that went by where someone in the center didn't get a soul-shattering traumatic call. But for me, it wasn't even the violence or the death. I took those as a given. It was the little things. The units you dispatch who give you attitude. The callers who yell and insult you even though they need your help. Everyone in the dispatch center is as stressed as you are, and as much as we like to promote a sense of camaraderie, the high-pressure work environment sometimes leads to clashes between colleagues. This has made me laugh, it's made me cry, it's made me hate myself, it's made me hate the public, and weirdly, it's made me love the public too. It's a thankless job most of the time, but anyone who really wants to make a difference, who wants to facilitate saving lives on a daily basis, go look at being a dispatcher. It's a hard job, but you'll lose count of the people you'll help before you even get your first paycheck.
This is actually the story of a call that I received in my first month of the job. I've been a 911 dispatcher for almost 13 years, and probably the worst call I ever had was on my first month on duty. How's that for rotten luck? If I get any of the minor details wrong, please don't hold it against me. The incident happened in 2009, and the person responsible was caught and charged, so you could probably Google it and find out exactly how the whole thing unfolded. But for now, I'll just tell you my memory of it. This happens bright and early around 7 a.m. I get a call in which a male in his 30s is just screaming into the phone. I make out the odd word here and there, help being the most frequent, but if you scream into a handset, especially a landline, it's possible that the sound just kind of fuzzes into nothingness. So after getting him to calm down just enough to give us the address, I dispatch a response unit out to him immediately. He kept screaming, my kids! And, "Oh my God, no, no, no!" And I keep trying my best to keep him calm, but it's almost impossible. My supervisor at the time goes ahead and dispatches EMTs too, just in case the kids are hurt. But the whole time we're basically just trying to find out what the hell was going on over there. Around this time, another caller in the apartment complex calls and says some guy is screaming about his kids being killed. Detectives who just started coming in for the day all rush outside to where the call was coming from, as by the stroke of weird luck, the caller was only like 3 or 4 blocks away. Turns out the father who had called had left his kids with their aunt/uncle to be babysat the night before. The killer was an ex-boyfriend of the aunt and came into the apartment, shot the aunt and uncle, then went into the kids' room, shot and stabbed one child and stabbed the other girl, aged 7 and 10, to keep them from identifying him. The only survivor was the murderer's 1-year-old daughter in the apartment who was too young to identify him. I heard the 1-year-old was left at the scene and found roaming among the bodies, covered in blood and gore by the time the cops busted in there. It should be noted that this took place in an apartment complex around 6 p.m. the night before, and several gunshots went off. No one called 911 when this happened. I can only imagine the horror that the father walked into that morning, and his screams will forever be ingrained in my mind.
Back when I worked full-time for the fire department, I used to take the odd shift working the medical side of the 911 dispatch center. Since smartphones have been getting more and more sophisticated, I've heard it's much easier to pin down exact locations. And in the UK, they have this new 3-word system that brings EMTs right on top of your position, should you happen to be stranded somewhere with no recognizable landmarks. I'm almost certain a system such as this is about to be implemented in certain states, but back in 2006, when all anyone had was flip phones and whatnot, finding out exactly where an injured party was could prove extremely difficult. From what I understand, these days you can ping a location to within a few feet of where a call is coming from, but back in the early 2000s, the area was ballooned to square miles. South side or north side of a city, maybe a county, but nothing as accurate as the tech today. So, with that little bit of context established, this is by far the worst 911 call I ever received. I got a call from a cell phone, presumably one of the aforementioned flip phones, and it was a younger girl telling me her mom had fallen and wouldn't wake up. Over the course of several questions, I established that not only has the mom apparently fallen down a flight of uncushioned wooden stairs, but that she didn't seem to have any vital signs whatsoever. This could have simply been because her young daughter simply didn't know what she was looking for or had made a mistake when it came to her breathing or her pulse. But the really alarming thing, the little girl couldn't give us an exact address, and as much as I asked her things like, "Do you have any mail around to read the address off of?" nothing seemed to work. She couldn't find anything, she couldn't remember, and she was beginning to panic. And in a situation where every single second counts, we were burning valuable time. What's worse, all she could say about where she lived was that it's a farm. And given that pretty much all of my district was rural farmlands, her description didn't bring us any closer to saving her mom's life. Working through all the standard questioning, I got to asking how long it had been since her mom fell down the stairs. She told me her mom had fallen just after her favorite TV show had started, and doing the math, I figured out that she'd been down for 30 minutes at the very least. We're taught to remain completely professional in those situations. I mean, I had one regional dispatch trainer tell me, the more robotic you are, the better. The more detached you are, the more lives you'll save. But in that moment, hearing the mom had been out for like a half hour, I felt my heart sinking. It was like an ice block in my chest. It was the toughest time I've ever had trying to keep it together on a call. But as per my training, I just took a deep breath and tried to mechanically work through the problem-solving techniques I've been taught. I'd asked her the street name, if there were any landmarks, if there was mail in the house, what she could see out of her front door, but the only thing that landed was the landmarks thing, with the girl telling me that her family walked to and from church every Sunday. Walked. So it had to be close, right? Seconds later, my supervisor and law enforcement are scouring a map of our assigned area, marking off every single church within a few miles of working farms. When they'd narrowed it down to a total number of 5 churches that could feasibly be walking distance for a family with small children, we dispatched a unit to each one with specific instructions to go in lights and sirens the whole way. This would give our younger caller a shot at hearing them approaching so we could further coordinate our response. But just keeping in mind that with only 3 fire rescue vehicles, 2 ambulances, and 4 police patrol cars to cover the entire area, tracking down this young girl's location meant we'd be stretching thin the entire time. By trying to save one life, we'd be risking the lives of others. It was a nerve-wracking risk, but one we were willing to take. Thankfully, after hearing some of our frantic calls going out over the radios, a couple of sheriff's deputies and a handful of highway patrol officers volunteered themselves to join the search effort. Bearing in mind that all this had happened, and we were no more than about 15 minutes into the call. I've never seen or heard of such a large-scale response in our county. Not on my watch, anyway. I mean, we really did go into overdrive as soon as all the circumstances of the call became evident. I remember the 15-minute mark because this is about the time we learned that the phone she was using was a cordless one, and the family kept the phone at the bottom of the stairs just feet away from the front door. This obviously meant that she'd be able to walk outside to look for lights and listen for sirens, a major breakthrough in our efforts to locate her. There was some added suspense when it seemed like she might not have been able to open the front door, but I thanked God when I heard her say, "I got it." Then, it was just a matter of waiting and hoping she'd heard the sirens in time. I know it's a huge cliche to say that minutes seem like hours or whatever, but I'd never really understood that whole time is elastic concept until then. It really did seem like forever before she heard our sirens, but there was no time to celebrate when she did. We were still faced with the task of figuring out which of our emergency vehicles we could hear. Law enforcement thought fast and had me telling each responder to stop and turn off their sirens before one by one we had them turn them back on so we could determine which one was the closest to her. It turned out to be one of the fire rigs, so we sent everybody to their position and then they spread out to cover the general area, all with their sirens on again. Eventually, one of the state troopers pulled into her street and the girl could see him coming. When the rest of the dispatch center heard me saying, "Okay, run to the fire truck, honey. Go wave to the fire truck," there was a bunch of silent celebration as people punched the air or buried their heads in their hands in relief. As the little girl met the fire truck, the driver was able to relay his position to us and they signaled that her job was essentially done. I stayed on the line while EMTs were guided onto the property, and once they'd arrived, it was adios from us, and all we could do was hope that the mom was okay. Well, it was more like pray by that point, as for all we knew, she had been flatlined for just going on about an hour. However, we heard later that by the time the medical guys got there, the mom was actually awake. She was incredibly disoriented as there was clearly something horribly wrong with her, but she was alive at least. They later found out that she had a broken back, an absolutely horrific break too, and one that might take her more than a year to recover from. The young girl was given a little reward from the police department for her bravery in the call, as she kept calm and did everything we told her to do. I can't say it was anything more than a token, something to take the edge off the traumatic event she'd gone through, but what else can you do? I suppose this has something of a happy ending, though. The mother recovered with no brain or nerve damage, but the recovery process in itself sounded almost as bad as the injury. I suppose the reason I'm telling you all this is to serve a reminder for something very, very important. As someone who's worked as an emergency dispatcher, I really can't stress how important it is for parents to teach their kids the following things. 1. Teach them your first and last names. 2. Get them to learn their home phone number off by heart. 3. Teach them how to make a 911 call, and that's all attached to that. 4. Teach them their home address and zip code. This is by far the most important one. I've lost count of the number of times when this information would have literally saved a life, or at least prevented life-changing damage to health or property. So please, you're not just sparing some 911 dispatchers' nerves, you might have been saving your own life, or those of your family members. Turn it into a game somehow. Heck, get creative, turn it into a song. But please, teach your kids their home address and teach them how to ask for police, ambulance, or fire. As ironic as it might sound, the scariest dispatch call I ever got came in on the non-emergency line. I answered to hear a heavily accented woman telling me that her husband was causing problems in the home. I could tell that she was kind of panicked, and since she apparently didn't speak too much English, I quickly requested the help of an interpreter. Then I listened as the Hispanic woman explains that her husband wasn't home right that second. It was just her and her kids, but that he might be back any second. I just breathed a sigh of relief that we had an interpreter on staff. Domestic violence calls mean a lot to me given my previous experience with it, and I think it would have killed me if I had been unable to help her. We managed to obtain the address that she was calling from and were in the middle of asking a few basic preliminary questions when suddenly I hear a man's voice getting louder and louder until several others began to scream. I then hear the telltale sound of the phone's handset hitting something hard, this sharp electro jank from where whoever was holding it had been forced to drop it in a hurry. I immediately asked my coworker who was working on the main police channel to send the officers code 3, lights and sirens, but the yelling and screaming seemed to go on in the background of the call, with no one talking into the handset. Suddenly, I hear the sounds of someone picking up the handset and putting the phone to their ear. I'm saying, ma'am, are you there?" over and over again. But it wasn't the lady who spoke next. It was a man's voice, and they sounded chillingly calm as they began to talk in Spanish. The interpreter relays to me that the man was telling us that everything was fine, and there was no need to send any police officers. But I could tell that the situation was anything but fine. But I kept him on the line as long as I could, relaying questions through the interpreters regarding who he was, what was happening, where the call was coming from. He's just dismissing them all, insisting there's no emergency, but it doesn't matter, because I keep him on the line just long enough for the responding unit to catch him unaware. I actually heard the officers busting their way into the property and ordering the guy to show them his hands. I later heard that the guy was the woman's husband, the one who had been causing problems at home. After she kicked him out and changed the locks, he'd come back with a knife to repeatedly stab her in front of their children. By some pure miracle, despite multiple stab wounds, the woman survived, and her husband went to prison for attempted murder. I also had the honor of the call being used as a training tool for non-English language domestic violence situations. It's weird thinking all these up-and-comers are listening to my voice during their training, and I'm glad I can't hear the things they say about my conduct. But if I can help stop potentially deadly incidences of spousal abuse, I think that makes it all worth it, don't you? I work as a 911 dispatcher, and one night, I get a call from a lady letting out the most piercing, blood-curdling screams I've ever heard. Standard operating procedure tells us to lower our voices and calm the caller down wherever possible. But in this case, I had to yell down the line just to be heard. I tell her in as stern a manner as possible to calm down and tell me the location of her emergency. But all she can say over and over again is that he is killing someone. It was a murder in progress, the first I'd ever had on the job. The caller was a woman living in a one-bedroom apartment with her husband and brother, and apparently those guys both despised one another. Then, on the night I got the call, the husband said something nasty to the brother, and the brother just lost it. He grabbed a knife from a kitchen drawer and just began hacking away at the husband, meaning that when this woman called, she was witnessing the murder of her husband at the hands of her brother. I can't even imagine how messed up that must have been, seeing two of your loved ones in a life and death confrontation like that. When the police arrived, the suspect showed no resistance. He just stepped out the front door with his hands up and surrendered. He was covered in so much blood that when he lay down on the ground, his body imprint was left in a stain of blood on the concrete. When he gave himself up to the officers, he told them that they should just dig a hole and bury me in it. And once they saw what he'd done inside the house, they were tempted to do just that. The wounds inflicted weren't so much stab wounds, although there were plenty of those, but like slashes with a steak knife. The brother had used the razor-sharp teeth of that thing to horrifying effect, and the cops said the woman's husband was literally carved up like a Thanksgiving turkey, shears of flesh just tumbling down his exposed arms and face where the brother had just gone berserk. I've had a handful of other calls like that, ones that really did hinge on me doing my job professionally in order to save lives. There might be many, but let me tell you, you never, ever forget your first. I always remember this as happening exactly after my 8th wedding anniversary. I was working nights at the time, so me and my husband ended up having the whole night to ourselves. Needless to say, I was in something of a chipper mood by the time I got to work. It was around 3:30 in the morning, and I was sitting in my pod telling my coworkers how my husband had gotten me a spa day. The last thing I hear before the phone rings is one of them say, "Bring back some face masks so we can pamper ourselves in the dispatch center." The thought of us doing our jobs with mud masks on made me laugh out loud, and I had to calm myself a little before picking up the call. That's the thing about working dispatch. Your shift goes from 1 to 100 with some calls. You're just sitting there, minding your own business, and the emergency just comes to you. And Jesus Christ, was this one an emergency? I opened with the usual, 911, what is your emergency? And I hear a soft, whispered female voice, couldn't have been any older than a teenager, say, "I can't do this anymore. Please help me." Right when I ask where she's at, I hear a male voice shouting, and then a banging sound as if someone is trying to break into the room this girl is in. I dispatch a nearby unit of cops as quickly as I can, telling them it's a potential domestic violence situation. In a way, it was a potential domestic, but in others, it was much, much worse. This girl was 13 years old, not much older than my son is now, and she had a gun to her head. It was her father on the other side of the door, and he was indeed trying his darndest to break it down. But it wasn't to hurt her. It was to stop his daughter from shooting herself. I joined him, pleading with the girl in as calm and calculated a way as possible to put the gun down, but all she did was say it again. "I can't do this anymore," before she pulled the trigger. I'll never forget the bang, or the screaming on the line as her father finally broke the door in, and the sound of him screaming how sorry he was. That shrill, empty, hollow shrieking. It'll forever be burned into my memory. It was probably one of the single worst moments of my entire life, but still, I had to keep it together and keep working. "Pick up the phone, sir. Please pick it up," I kept saying. "I need to walk you through CPR, sir. Please pick up the phone. Deputies are coming. Paramedics are coming. But please pick up the phone." No one picked up the phone. I don't think he could hear me over his own screams. I stayed on the open line, calling out to someone to pick up, but there was a weird noise before the screaming sounded further away, almost like the phone had been tossed to one side. As the paramedics and deputies finally arrived on the scene, they called it. There wasn't a surgeon in the world that could have saved that girl's life. The contents of her skull were spread all over her bedroom wall. Signal 7. That was her name now. Death investigation. As I disconnected the call, I remember my upcoming spa just popping into my head. Like a weird, now where was I moment. I guess that's just how we compartmentalize things. It occurred to me that that little girl would never have a spa trip anniversary present from her husband, and how tragic that was. A dumb, self-centered thought, I know, but it was just how my mind opted to process the horror of what I'd just been exposed to. I didn't cry until I drove home. A full hour's drive of just non-stop, ugly sobbing. Pulling into my driveway, I wiped my face, went into my kids' room and hugged them. They started crying too, confused and frightened as to why I was so upset. I guess that wasn't quite the right call, but I just couldn't help it. It was just something I needed to do. A good number of years have passed since I got that call, and it definitely wasn't the last time that I had to deal with something like that. Trouble is, they never get any easier. You just learn to deal with the fallout better, to just keep on going and keep answering those calls. Dispatch is a crazy job to say the very least. One call you're talking to a toddler who's just had a nightmare, but doesn't want to wake up his mom or dad. The next minute you're listening to someone taking their last breath. I even got a call from someone reporting Taco Bell for getting their order wrong. Dispatchers get threats, they get screamed at, they get called every curse word ever conceived. But we keep going. We keep answering those calls. We lose coworkers that take their own lives every single year. The stress of the job is extremely high, and there's very little in the way of closure for those that need it. Dispatchers carry a heavy burden, long after the call has ended. Around 25 years ago, it was a typical serene Sunday morning in the upstate New York Sheriff's Office 911 center I worked in. But when I say New York, I mean way upstate. Think the Adirondack Mountains, streams, beautiful lakes, and people from Long Island in their summer homes. The most serious calls we ever took tended to be accidents on the interstate highway that ran the length of the country, or domestic disputes that never involved an arrest. May I remind you that this was a long time ago, and house fires. You get the idea. Sunday shift, picture the serene, newspapers out on the consoles, Dunkin' Donuts still gave free donuts and coffee to road patrol deputies, and us underpaid, forgotten, and normally overworked dispatchers. 911 rang, and I was so bored that I actually jumped on it, thinking it's probably a parking complaint about a church from a frequent flyer with nothing else to do. Nope. Open line in the actual freaking middle of butt-kiss nowhere. A minimum of 20 minutes response time for any unit, police, fire, or EMS. Instantly you know it's going to be a tough call. I heard an adult female in the background say, "Oh my God," before adding something about burning. She then picked up the phone and adds a desperate "help" before it sounded an awful lot like she dropped the phone again. Next thing I heard was a door of some description slamming. Then about 30 seconds later, a distant bang, like a firework or maybe a propane canister exploding. Well, I dispatch all 3 types of emergency units as per policy with unconfirmed type of emergencies, but I was 100% sure the house was on fire because of the burning comment. Then I heard, "Please help me," again, only very softly. Positive that the house was burning, I tried in vain to get a response and kept asking if she was alone, get out, etc., all the while updating and expediting units on the radio. First volunteer fire chief arrived and reported no fire, so instantly I'm like, what's going on here? But the fire chief ran around the house checking for smoke, but instead he found a man in the backyard, motionless, and holding a gun. This is the day I found out that a 12-gauge shotgun fired point blank into the chest of a 30-year-old woman holding a phone sounds almost identical to the sound a screen door makes when it slams. I listened to the poor woman's last words as she died alone on her kitchen floor, and I also somehow managed to send a firefighter directly into a life-threatening situation. There's no academy course that exists that can teach you how to deal with stuff like that. Took me a long time to stop equating a slamming screen door with gunfire. Try explaining that to your family and friends when one of them lets the screen door close a little too hard on Labor Day weekend. Anyway, the firefighter turned tail and ran, and the guy turned the gun on himself instead. But didn't get it quite right and survived initially. The number of resources spent trying to save him before his inevitable death was ridiculous. But because I was also a volunteer EMT, I understood it. The medics on scene even got med flights to transfer him to a trauma center, but they couldn't save him. So I guess karma worked well that day. As a dispatcher, I get some pretty wild calls. And I remember I got a call from a woman who said her husband and son had gotten into a fight that had gotten totally out of hand. Sadly to say, that kind of thing is way more common than you'd think, to the point where I'd even call it a run-of-the-mill domestic situation. In those types of situations, we're trained to send a minimum of 2 units, one to break up the fight, and another to gather up all the necessary statements. While they're on their way, I ask the woman what her husband and son are fighting over, whether this is regular behavior for them, and the whole time I can still hear them screaming and shouting in the background. Occasionally a door will slam, the voices get louder, the woman begs them to stop, and the cycle just keeps going on. She told me that they would argue regularly, but she'd never felt the need to call 911 before. This time was different, she said. and I could hear the terror in her voice that confirmed this is true for me. She started to tell me how their son had been staying with them since his divorce the previous year. I ask her how old her son is, and she says 43. Now I'm instantly taken aback here. I had it in my head that the son was in his teenage years, as this is most commonly when the father-son clashes occur. She actually manages to calm down a little as she tells the story, and I begin to really feel for this family. The son had obviously had some kind of nervous breakdown, leading to depression, and he'd barely even gone outside for the past few weeks. He evidently wasn't dealing very well. Then right as things kind of calm down and the shouting in the background dies down, I just hear the woman blurt out, "Oh my God, he's got a gun," in the middle of a sentence. I keep asking her, "Ma'am, who has the gun? Tell me who has the gun." And she tells me she saw her husband walking down the hall out to where the son was, and she'd seen his .38 revolver glinting in his hand. And herein lies why dispatch can be so traumatic. I know something awful is about to happen. Once some people get going, there's no stopping them, so my priority here is to preserve human life as best I can until the actual marked units arrive on scene. In the calmest, most mechanical voice possible, I tell her to not try and get in the way, but to find cover and stay put. The ideal place being a porcelain bathtub if the family owns one. You have no idea how many lives porcelain tubs have saved over the years. I had one coworker call them bathroom bunkers, and it stuck. When it's clear she understands my instructions, I radio into my police units and tell them to go full code 3, lights, sirens, door kicking mode, while telling my ambulance to stage nearby. This is standard practice to ensure that medical units aren't hurt. If we have an EMT go down at a scene somewhere, God, that's a whole can of worms I don't even want to think about. When I get back to the call, it's almost totally quiet now. I ask the woman what's happening, and she tells me that she too can't hear anything, and that she even thought it might have calmed down once the son had seen his dad's gun. I hear her say, "Do you think I should check on them?" And I'm right in the middle of telling her to stay put when, bang, I hear this horrible scream of no down the phone, and all of a sudden the woman bursts into tears. I know the worst has happened, and all I can do is inform my officers that there have been shots fired at the scene. By this time, they're both on scene and grabbing their long guns from their trunks, and as they approach the house, they can hear both the dad yelling and the son groaning in pain from around the family garage. And they come around to the front of the garage where it was clear both men were, and notice that there's a small keypad, presumably with a code to open it. I get the code from the wife and pass the information to my officers, listening as they plug the code in before the distinct sound of the garage door raising can be heard. I can't even tell you how fast my heart was racing as I heard those doors slowly rising. Any second, I'm expecting to hear a torrent of gunfire exchanged between the shooter and the officers. I was convinced someone was going to die that night, and I'm keyed up to send in another unit of EMTs, but there's nothing, just silence. After what felt like forever, an officer keys up and tells me that they have one guy in custody and one on the gurney. The shooter had just given up as soon as he saw the cops. Somehow the son actually survived, and his dad was arrested for attempted murder. And unbelievably, the argument started because the dad wanted the son to move out. That's all. It was something so small and dumb, but it just escalated and escalated until the father had no problem turning a gun on his own flesh and blood. As an emergency call dispatcher, I once got a call from an elderly lady out in the countryside. She was around 70 years old, as sweet as can be, and politely asked me for some advice on an injury she'd gotten. She'd had an accident while preparing dinner for her family, who were on their way over in the next hour or so, and wanted to know if it was serious enough for her to have to request an ambulance. So I go through the usual routine of asking her name and address, then ask how she cut her hand. She starts by saying that she was breaking down a chicken carcass with a meat cleaver, and immediately I'm thinking, uh-oh. She then says something like, I must have just come down a little bit too hard on it, dear, because the next thing you know, my thumb hurts and I'm bleeding something awful." I ask her whereabouts she'd cut herself, and she says, "Just between my thumb and my first finger, dear," which confused me at first. She'd cut the area between her thumb and finger, but she said that she'd come down hard on it, and that could only mean that... "Can I ask you, madam, have you actually severed the thumb?" I asked, absolutely dreading the potential answer. "Oh no, dear," the elderly woman said. "Well, mostly, but it's still hanging on a bit. I think I might be in a bit of shock. Do you think you could send me an ambulance, please?" I'd already dispatched an ambulance right around the time I'd suspected that she'd gone and cut her thumb off. The poor old woman, she must have been absolutely terrified, and the idea that she didn't want to trouble us with what was without a doubt a life-threatening injury, it broke my heart. I found out from the ambulance crews that it was a good job that she'd called when she did. She was on blood thinners to reduce the chances of a blood clot, which meant that by the time paramedics arrived, her kitchen looked like a slaughterhouse. By the time they got her into the ambulance, she was close to passing out, and she definitely would have died if they hadn't gotten her to A&E in time. Get this, though. The doctors were actually able to reattach her thumb. She ended up losing most of the feeling in it, but still, pretty amazing considering she'd almost completely severed it. I think her family moved her into a residential home after that, for her own safety, and I hope she's doing much better there. God love her. This happened during my final year of EMS dispatch, and honestly, it's one of the calls that started me off thinking about quitting. I get a call from a frantic woman who said that she'd walked into her apartment to find her roommate hanging from a hook over a door frame. She'd been holding the girl's legs up to loosen the noose while she called 911, but she didn't have the strength to hold her up much longer and had no idea what to do other than call 911. I ask where exactly in the apartment she is, and she says the door frame between the kitchen and the hallway. I ask if it would be possible to gently lower her friend, run into the kitchen and grab a knife to cut them down. She says she thinks so. I counter into it like, "Okay, ma'am, we're gonna grab a knife in 3, 2, 1, go." I hear her grunt a little as she lowers the body, then cutlery jingling together as she grabs a knife, and finally, the thud of her roommate's body hitting the floor as she succeeded in cutting the rope. Okay, I cut her down," she says after grabbing the phone again. I tell her the EMTs are on their way, but then I finally get to asking her how long her friend had been hanging. She tells me she has no idea, that she's been working all day. I tell her to begin CPR if she knows it, which she does, and after a few cycles of chest compressions and mouth-to-mouth, she picks up the phone again and says, "I don't think it's working." I tell her to keep going and that it's essential to keep trying. That's when the lady hits me with, "But she's cold. She's so cold." I had to take a minute to compose myself. Those words hit me like a ton of bricks for some reason. I dealt with worse calls than that. Straight up triple murders, assaults, all that, but hearing this girl tell me how cold her friend was just tore me up. Just over a year later, I retired. I don't regret my career in dispatch, and I know I made a difference out there. But there's only so much one person can take, and it was that call among a handful of others that just pushed me over the edge. I'm a former chief of police in Glenlyn, Florida. A call began like this, like any other. 911, what's your emergency? A woman is screaming frantically saying, "An alligator ate part of my baby." My dispatchers tried their best to get some straight answers out of her, but even when she stopped screaming down the phone, all she'll say is, "We were just walking along the sidewalk and out of nowhere, an alligator jumped out of the water and ate part of my baby." Living in Florida, this was entirely possible, and we'd had all prepared for the worst possible outcome. Police arrived on scene, then the fire department, and an ambulance not far away. The fire department medic was the first to arrive, but he radios in that the other units should abort. Of course, the first thought was the child was dead and no EMTs would be needed. And a few minutes later, the medic said animal control was needed. I'm thinking, Jesus Christ, this poor woman, what a terrible thing to happen. And then out of nowhere, I hear something over the radio like, is that a leash? There was a leash hanging out of the alligator's mouth. The baby the woman had been referring to wasn't a human baby at all. It was her freaking dog. It's something we laugh about now, but after all the horror and fear over this fictional poor kid's life, we were straight up angry when we found out. It didn't help that the woman complained that no one would take her to the hospital or take what was left of her dog. There wasn't much to the vet. All I can say is, thank God no humans were injured. Believe me, I do feel bad for the dog, sure, and the lady, but let your dog run off wild near the rivers or lakes in the Sunshine State? You didn't bring your dog for a walk. You brought it as an appetizer. As a dispatcher, I had a call come in from a woman who was screaming that someone in the house was being stabbed. We knew it was serious, as screams could be heard in the background as well as a man yelling and cursing. Dispatch was quickly able to determine the location and had cars en route. The dispatcher attempted to keep the caller on the line, but the attacker wasn't done. He found her on the phone and began stabbing her as she's screaming into the telephone, "Help, he's killing me," before she dropped the phone. He could be heard in the background yelling at his victim as he went about his continued gruesome attack. The accused in the matter was served with a restraining order that very day. He returned to the home and was banned from entering and went on a killing spree. 2 other relatives in the house were also stabbed before he killed his ex-girlfriend and stabbed himself. His stab wounds were described as being superficial and non-life-threatening. The officers could be heard arriving at the scene just a minute or 2 after they were dispatched, but it was too late for this domestic violence victim. A recording of the call is used in both our training of new dispatchers and also new officers. The blood-curdling screams and pleading of this young woman on the phone leave an indelible impression on everyone who hears it. The only silver lining is that the murderer will die in prison. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/Let'sReadOfficial, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And join a live stream on random Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in long compilation form and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.